You are walking down a tunnel, carved out of the stones about you ages ago. The floor has been worn smooth by the passage of loathsome creatures over all this time. The walls, rough-hewn, can be reached if you just spread your fingers out a little. The light flickers in the stale, still air that yet carries the stench of carrion and filth. The very feeling of the ceiling and the walls pressing down upon you grows greater with each step. Why have you come this way, eh? The search for treasure, perhaps? Gold? Jewels? Other prizes? Certainly popular reasons. Or perhaps you might be one who comes searching for lost lore down here. Perhaps this will make a great story to grow out your fame in her flickering, gleaming allure. Or maybe you are just foolhardy enough to want to test your skills and your courage against death itself. Perhaps any one of these reasons, or all of them. Well, your journey nears its end. The tunnel before you widens out into a room. And as you take those steps into the room, your light catches the glimmer before you, and you first lay eyes upon the Lair of OmnusI. Greetings, adventurers. I am OmnusI, Game Master at Large and Master of the Lair, here to welcome you to our very first true Lair of OmnusI episode. Level 1, the experience of the game. Now, what I hope to do with Lair of OmnusI is, firstly, to entertain you, secondly, to share some of the different lore that I've accumulated, perspective that I've achieved, but also some of the crazy ideas that I've come up with that you might find that you could appropriate and use yourself. But another aspect is to invite new people who are interested in role-playing games but have never had the opportunity to play, to give them a sample so that they can inspire them to seek out games on their own. Now, it can be difficult to do. Tabletop role-playing games can seem rather intimidating, especially with some of the stereotypes that they've had over time. But I'd wager that almost everybody has played some aspect of role-playing in their time, from the games of pretend that we played as children, moving up into board games, which may parallel or mimic role-playing games. What? You didn't know that board games parallel role-playing games? Well, when you were playing Monopoly, what were you doing but stepping into the shoes for a short time of a billionaire real estate development broker? And if you were playing chess, you were mimicking out ancient movements of military units across a battlefield. So even though the role wasn't as well stated and is more concentrated on rules and competition, there were some aspects of roles in those particular games, as well as almost every board game, to some extent, has some root in a role that you are playing as a player. If you've played video games, you've probably played some form of role-playing game as well. Many of those games attempt to emulate the experience that one might find in a role-playing game that's played out with others on a tabletop by giving you options for dialogue or ways of customizing and upgrading your character. These touch upon some of the benefits of role-playing games and things that draw us back to the table session in and session out, but don't quite fulfill all the potential that a person can have from tabletop role-playing games. Now, what happens at an individual table may vary from table to table. There is no one experience, and as my personal rule zero that you will hear me say over and over again in the Lair, there is no one right way to enjoy these games. Every group will be a little bit different. Most groups will change rules that make sense within their group. These are called house rules, and it's perfectly all right. You will have groups that perhaps enjoy a particularly narrative storyline for their characters, where maybe the role of tactics and combat are diminished, whereas an entirely different group may care very little about playing out a role and instead concentrate on mastering the dungeon and the world around them, using their characters' abilities and their own tactics and ingenuity. Neither one of these are particularly right or wrong, in as much as the players and everybody in the group is enjoying themselves and having a good time. These are games, after all. They're meant for enjoyment. So, I will give you a short sample of what a role-playing game would be like here in the Lair. If you can stretch out your imagination a little bit, I think that you may find that some of this might start to feel familiar. Now, for purposes of this, there will be a little bit of jargon thrown in, and we'll try to bring you up to speed. My next episode, I believe, will be a glossary episode wherein I will relate all of the particular bits of jargon so that we can all speak a common language. Typically, in a role-playing game, you have a group between 3 to 6 players and participants. I'm not saying you can't have less, and I'm not saying you can't have more. I've certainly been in both. Solo role-playing involves a person with almost a video game-like mode. They'd have some sort of a book or something, and they may be able to make choices throughout based on what their character would do, which gives them some license to control where the narrative goes, and it would direct them on how to resolve conflicts and such. But for the most part, that doesn't allow for a great deal of role-playing. It's just, again, a choose-your-own-adventure or a tactical story. When you're playing with 2 people, you will have one person telling the story and the other person responding. Such games generally do have every bit as much a potential for role-playing as a large group. And if you go through literature, there's any number of examples, literature, movies, of people who by themselves comprise the party of a story. For example, Conan has many companions, but he's the only fixed person through the story. Likewise, if it's 2 people, one person tells the story, the other person plays the main character or characters of the story, you can have a perfectly fulfilling role-playing session. However, the potential of these games is realized when you have multiple players who can play off of each other, blend their skills together, as well as play off of each other. If you read a good story, a chunk of that story is going to be based on dialogue, and dialogue between the various characters is what really helps to develop and build out those characters. It shows bonds that are formed, or maybe crises between the characters that flesh them out, that give them permanence, that give them identity within your mind as you think about the character. Likewise, having more players in a game enables them to develop those characters based off of the other characters around them. They will be around each other more than they will anyone else, and that kind of communication and conflict and bonds that are formed and walls that are put up are kind of central themes in role-playing games. It's about the people more so than about the world, generally speaking. One person is a special person in the group. They are a little bit aside from the players, and that is the person who masters the game. Generally called the Game Master, although different games have different titles. Dungeon Master, Storyteller, Story Weaver, plenty. But for the general purpose term, we'll use Game Master. The Game Master has a couple of different hats that they wear. And in my game, I like to actually wear my Game Mastering hat to let everybody know that when they're at my table, I have the floor. Unless I choose to give it to somebody else to take their turn to tell their little part of the story. In a way, it's very much like shooting a movie. The Game Master is the director. He doesn't get a lot of face time in front of the camera, but he determines who gets the spotlight based on their turn, and a good director will make sure that everybody gets their share. Likewise, a Game Master has to do that. He has to determine whose turn it is, who gets interacted with, who gets their character propped up a little bit at the right time. And on top of that, to carry on the movie theme, he's also the set director. He creates the world for the players. He describes in detail what goes on so that the players have things to act upon. If the players are in a bar and one of them decides he wants to throw a mug at a particularly surly bar patron, that player tells the Game Master, I want my character to pick up a mug and throw it at this person. The Game Master determines if the mug is there. It's a Schrodinger's mug, kind of. But then he also tells them, what to do to resolve this mug throwing. So the players are constantly bouncing their ideas for what their characters are doing off the Game Master. Also, the Game Master is the physics of the world. He should know the rules, or he or she should know the rules better than any of the players, ideally. And when the players have questions about what's going on, they tell the Game Master. The Game Master makes up or references what that rule is so that the play can proceed and everything can be resolved. So in a way, the Game Master has a lot of responsibilities. On the other hand, they have the opportunity of having the most creative position in the game. They create the world around the players, so they have 100% of the command of what's going on. They are responsible for what happens, but at the same time, it can be an incredibly liberating feeling playing God for a little while. This is a good portion of the reason why I enjoy playing as a Game Master more often than I play as a player. Now, the players, that's not to say they don't have anything to do. The players will have their characters, which will mostly be delineated on a character sheet. And that character sheet will have their statistics and abilities, skills, and gear that will tell them what their characters can and can't do. And within the framework of that, the player gives them personality and dictates what their actions are going to be, or at least what their attempted actions are going to be. In each game, there's some way of resolving what actually happens, whether or not that's rolling all the funny little dice that some game masters collect. Get back here, you. Or perhaps through cards or some other method. Every game has its own particular method of resolving conflicts, basically the mechanics of the game. So, if you're going to experience that kind of session, I can tell you all about it. Usually the Game Master is in the center, the players ring the Game Master, line up some way so that the players can see the Game Master and hear him, more importantly, at all times. It may be the group centers around one large feature. For example, if there's a three-dimensional dungeon that's been created by the Game Master so that the players can all see and manipulate it. Or perhaps an open stretch of table so that everybody can roll commonly into the middle of it so that everyone can see what they roll. It's all allowed. No one way is necessarily right. Again, sometimes the resources may dictate what your gaming space is going to look like. Sometimes it's just what you want or need. I know plenty of people who have the resources. They could have richly detailed miniatures and dungeon layouts, but choose a more abstract way of playing because it works for them, and that's fine. So, what's it really like? Well, I could, of course, tell you what it's like as a game master, because that's what I am. To tell you from the player's perspective, I would need... You need me. And you are... I am player. I play all the players in your games, because everyone else you know is too camera shy. So, I have a character sheet here with my character on it. And with that, I can basically look at it at a moment's notice, know which kind of dice I need to roll to resolve whatever I'm going to try to do. And hopefully I succeed more than I fail, and my character lives through your adventure. Alright, player. Let's try this out. You were walking down a narrow tunnel, roughly ripped out of the stone around you ages ago. The floor has been worn smooth by the passage of loathsome creatures over the ages. Your light flickers in the cool, dry air that reeks subtly of carrion and filth. How far you are beneath the surface, you cannot say. However, the walls of the tunnel begin to widen, until eventually you find yourself in the cavernous opening that depicts a room ahead. What do you do? Alright, we're coming into a room, you say, huh? Well, first of all, I'll listen, because rooms are oftentimes where the monsters hang out. And I'll listen really carefully for any clues of anything that might be there. If I don't hear anything, I'm going to open up my lantern so I get a little bit more light, and move the little shutters out of the way so that the light shines forward and I can see into the room. Yes, all the monsters will know I'm here, but if I didn't hear anything, not too worried. Then I am going to take my pole. I'm going to tap the floor and make sure that there's no traps in front of me. Kind of nasty thing to fall into a pit trap or cross a tripwire. And I'd rather the pole eats it rather than me. And then as I go, I will note all the main features in front of me, keeping an eye out for any ambushes. And every once in a while I'll look up and I'll look behind me to make sure nothing's sneaking up that way. Very good. Now, exploration is one part of adventuring, certainly. But if you look through almost any role-playing game manual, you're going to find out that most of the text involves combat. So, the situation changes a little bit. Also, what can change a role-playing situation is the addition of extra players. So how about this? When the light shines into the room, to the two of you, it reveals a pair of brutish orcs. Their armor is studded with spikes that leaves absolutely no doubt about their state of mind. As they look at you, they lick their lips hungrily, and the crude, heavy iron weapons in their hands twitch with the thought of covering themselves in your blood. What do you do? Well, my character, Lothal, is pretty good in a fight, so a couple of mangy orcs don't really scare me that much. I will pull out my battle axe and I will declare my cry, "Death to all orcs!" and try to look really intimidating and convincing. And then move to put myself between the reedy nerd with a spellbook back there and the orcs. If they want to come at him, they got to go through me first. I'll try to put up a defensive position so that they can't easily go around me, and say something really nasty about their mothers. Well, Corhall the Wizard will not be so bold as to draw the attention of the orcs. He'll let the fool with a shield and heavy armor do that. Instead, creeping into the shadows, Corhall will begin chanting mystical words, and then when the time is right, he will leap forward, arcane darts flying from his hand, killing those orcs deader than your axe possibly could. Can I roll now? Good. 15 points of damage. At least one of those orcs should die from that. All right. So there you have an example of what combat is like. That same experience allows the group to flex their muscles and use tactics to survive in a harsh environment, forging themselves again and again in combat. And sometimes you're even going to have scenarios, potentially, and some groups don't feature these as much, but you may have times when no swords are going to solve the situation, and then instead a person has to speak for their character to attempt to accomplish their aims, such as,
Well, of course, only a great mage like you would have access to the spells that I require. I was hoping that I could offer some of the treasure that I have earned risking my life in exchange for your tutelage to teach me more spells to add to my book. If you could spare your time and make some wealth to help me on the path of power?
so you see, all of these are different avenues in which different games, game masters, and groups of players choose to spend a chunk of their free time in each other's company playing these kind of games. They can be much more involved than what you've seen here today, and many of the games that are played involve elements that I have just relayed to you along with player, but also some of them take flight into completely different avenues. If you wish to get into the game, I strongly suggest searching the internet for groups in your area, perhaps your favorite local gaming store. If you have one close at hand, it can be a godsend. I will certainly be doing an episode where I will be proudly showing you my favorite local gaming stores. I believe it's important to prop up such a tradition. They are starting to vanish by the wayside with the onset of the internet and instant gratification from sites like Amazon. So I very much enjoy patronizing my favorite local gaming store, and I hope other players do as well. So that is the experience of the game, or at least one experience. If you choose to search into these games yourself, you may have your own experiences, which will be unique to you. And hopefully there'll be something that inspires your passion, creativity for many years to come. In each level of the lair, I hope to have a segment where I give you a part of the treasure of the experience. In this case, I like to offer up a little bit of my world. What I like to do, or what I like to digest in order to, not literally, but entertainment that I like to use for inspiration, or that has seen me grow as a game master over all of these years. Current one, and appropriate for level 1, talking about the experience of the game, one of my go-tos if my own group has been, say, decimated by the plague and I only have a handful of players, it's always easy to entertain us by whipping out the old copy of Munchkin by Steve Jackson Games. Illustrated by John Kovalik, who is one of my favorite writer, authors, artists. The two together have collaborated to make a fantastic game. The game itself is a microcosm of a type of role-playing. The term munchkin is often used disparagingly to refer to people who throw out role-playing, unless it's convenient, and just look to win the game by amassing as much power and slaughtering foes faster than anybody else. Their idea is to get ahead of everyone else, and appropriately in this game, that's also the goal. The first person to get to 10th level wins, and that can come at the expense of your allies, the other players in the group. The advantage of this is that I don't have to set aside to run. I can freely play with the rest of the group and try to win myself. The game is very tongue-in-cheek. There's almost many of the monsters are puns or playing around with the various tropes of role-playing games. Even somebody who themselves doesn't have experience with role-playing games can fully enjoy this game. And if you're a terrible collector, somebody who compulsively feels that you have to have everything related to a given topic, this one can get a bit expensive. I will warn you, because I'm there. There are lots of different expansions, lots of different flavors of the game. They all work together fairly well, but it can scratch a lot of different itches, from pirates with Munchkin's Booty to Kung Fu with Munchkin Fu, westerns, space. There's lots of different variations of the game, and if you collect them all, you can create an incredible assortment of abilities and powers and treasure and just all kinds of stuff. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. You'll hear me preach frequently about how good Steve Jackson Games products are, and I find most of them to be very good. This is no exception. Munchkin is a game that I've taken with me to cons, I've played with strangers, I've played with my friends. Highly recommend it. It's a great rainy day game too. So, this is OmnusI, your master of the Lair, thanking you for coming into this level of the dungeon. You have successfully completed level 1 and have rightfully earned 250 experience points. Make sure that you record these on your character sheet. Thank you for coming. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Lair, stay tuned. We will have more. Feel free to like or subscribe, of course. And now that we're here on YouTube, this lair looks like it'll be quite cozy for some time to come. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you, and fair adventures.